when they talk about the Depression, they say it happened in 1929. You've heard that?
I think so.
Now, that's what they all say. But it didn't. The crash of the stock market, which really started it, was in October of 1929. The rest of that year had been wildly prosperous. And then in October it went just completely to pieces, and caused companies to fail, and
It was an awful
zillions of people to get out of work, and big projects stopped. Had a big strike downtown, and people abandoned their homes. Teamsters Union, the truck drivers, and some other workmen belonged to this big union. It was called 544, and they were raising they had barricaded one of the big streets downtown, wouldn't let any traffic through there. It was an important business street. The business guys in town decided to go down there and chase them out. My dad was going to go, and he didn't. I heard him talking about it in bed the night before. He did not go. But a father of a good friend of mine in school was killed by getting hit with a baseball bat. And one of Dad's friends, who was the head of a businessman's club downtown, got hit in the head with a baseball bat, and he didn't die, but he wasn't the same guy after that. These were just awful times. Millions of people couldn't pay their house payments.
What happened then?
Well, first off, they started just backing up a moving van and pulling all their furniture out and kicking them out, the owners, because they weren't getting paid. And then the government, under President Franklin Roosevelt, set up a thing called the Home Owners Loan Corporation. And that's what saved our family's home. What they would do is they would look your house over and look at how much you owed, and if you couldn't pay on that, they'd throw you out. But what the government would do is to go to this guy and say they had a $20,000 mortgage, and the guy that had loaned the money wasn't getting any money out of it. They're very unlikely to get another buyer either. So the government went to him and they said, well, they have a $20,000 loan here. We, the government, will give you $9,000 or $10,000 on that if you will take that and cancel the mortgage. And then they set up payments to the government that were small enough so people could pay them. And that was a wonderful thing, and saved millions of homes from being what they call foreclosed, which means that they take the property that you made a deal to pay for by the month, and if you didn't make the payments, out you went. the banks went broke all over the place. And you lost all the money you had in the bank. And then the government, for some reason or other, called in the gold. Gold is like a reserve currency, or like it has a value that doesn't go down to nothing. And if you had gold, I don't know if they were making you turn in your wedding rings or whatever, but if you had any gold jewelry, or you had any gold dishes, or had any gold coins, they required you to turn them in. And then they, as far as I would know, they took them down to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and melted them down and made gold bars out of them. A violent time, and it was a tragic time. People lost so many things. Dad lost a big bunch of his family's farm down in Minnesota. Couldn't pay the taxes on it. We were staying in Wisconsin in the years 1931, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7 years. We'd go over and stay on this farm in this little town with 700 people in it. And my uncle had a good car that he bought about 2 years before the crash, a Buick. And they had a nice farm home, but there was no running water, there was no electricity. They had a telephone, and no sewer system in the house, so they had what they call an outhouse. They were a little house, and they had a board here for the seat, and they had a little hole here for the kids, and a bigger one here for smaller ones. They'd be called freeholders. They had a pit down in the ground, and it'd get pretty awful in there in the hot summer. And then when that pit got too loaded, why they would move the little house off it, and they shovel stuff out. And now that was how everybody lived, even when the farms were good, because the electricity didn't come that far until probably 1935. And they didn't have enough money to put a water system in, but they had a windmill that pumped the water for the cows and for them. And they had good water. And the windmill was a good machine. That's about the only machine they had. So, but that town's bank failed. It just was a disaster for the farmers around there, because they lived, they were savers. And they were what you call frugal people. They didn't go for a lot of show. Mr. Fauché, who got the Fauché Tower built, was sent to jail for 15 years.
Why?
For
losing a lot of money.
So he couldn't pay for the tower?
No, tower went broke, and they had a big trial. And he had been, he was a guy that showed off his money. And he built this very fancy building. And he lived over in our neighborhood. Didn't have a very fancy house. But anyway, they put him in Leavenworth prison for 15 years. And then President Franklin Roosevelt, about 2 or 2.5 years later, pardoned him and let him loose. But another thing that's real funny is the matter of how the value of money changed. Mother would take my brother and me down to a nice restaurant downtown, cafeteria, where you push a tray around and you get a plate of this and a plate of that and big dessert and some hot chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And we were 37, 24, I'm thinking 1937. 24, 6, 7, 13 years old. I would be, and my brother would be younger. And we'd walk around loading up a tray, and we'd have just about all you could carry. And I remember that we'd eat 49 cents worth. I didn't see a new car bought in the neighborhood until about 1937. And the automobile companies, many automobile companies went out of business. My uncle in Wisconsin taught me how to fix the coaster brakes on the bikes, take them apart and clean them up and put new grease in them and adjust them. So I passed the word around that I could do that, and then a lot of kids would bring their bikes in. I'd get a few dollars that way. One thing we would do when it'd be terribly hot, if you walk down Hennepin Avenue, the theaters all left their doors open. And they had air conditioning, the only place around that had it. And you walk by there, and you think, you know, if I give them a dime, which is what tickets cost, I'd go sit there through a couple of shows. My brother did that many times. And movies were big. You had to have some form of entertainment. For our family, they began to come out of that depression in 1934. And we bought a new car in 1937. Dad wouldn't have thought of doing that before. That was a very, very nice Oldsmobile, and that cost $1,000. That depression is over, but we had in 1970, we had a very bad thing that they didn't call a depression, they call it a slump. And it lasted a couple of 2 or 3 years. Very difficult times.
What happened during the slump?
Business went to pot. Banks wouldn't loan money. Very, very difficult time for businesses. 1980, 10 years later, same thing happened. And we didn't feel it at the company, but a lot of companies did in 1990. There was another one 10 years apart. And the idea that you're going to do anything of consequence and not have to weather those slumps, it's just foolish to think it, because it gets really tough. It got so bad in 1980 that big banks all over the country were going broke. One thing that they did after the big bank crashes in the 30s, the government put together a thing that's called FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And if the bank fails, the government will pay off up to $100,000 on deposits. People had gotten badly burned, practically everyone, in their stock market investments. And you'll find that there are a lot of people that live very well, that every morning when the paper comes in, when the first thing they open it up to is the stock market page, and they go down and see how this stock is doing, how this stock is doing, and they either smile or they frown, depending how these numbers are. And from my point of view, and many people that run businesses think of the stock market as a place where people want to make a lot of money without doing any work. I bought a motorcycle in 1940, and it was an old highway department one that wasn't in very good shape, so I tore it all apart. I had learned to do real good spray painting from a guy in our church who was a particularly expert guy in an Oldsmobile garage. And I'd go over there after school and watch him do it. And I got in any trouble while he'd tell me what to do. And I learned to paint as good as anybody could do it. And I bought and sold some cars, and just did things. Anyway, as you grow up, nose around and find out what it's like to run a gas station, who runs the Dairy Queens, do they make much money running them, the beauty shops, hamburger joints, you can nose around and learn a lot of that stuff before you're 20 years old. Lots of it. One thing I had was my mother was a very, very smart person. My dad was a very smart guy. And between them, they spent a lot of time on me. And I didn't like school very well. I went to the Kenwood School in Minneapolis, which was that would have been that would have been the fanciest school public school in town. And had a very competent principal who I arranged for 3 other guys and I. We graduated together, and we were there was a fourth boy, and then a whole bunch of girls in our graduating class. The three of us boys in that class, she was 92 or something like that, and I rigged up a deal. So we all got together and we took her down to the IDS building when they had a restaurant on the 50th floor, and just gave her the most wonderful time. And it was amazing. She remembered all kinds of stuff about all of us. She was an awfully good principal. But she had a whole bunch of real poor teachers.